My name is Corinne Albright. I'm 24 years old, and I work as a dental hygienist at a small family practice in Decatur, Georgia. I drive a 2019 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that I never got fixed. I eat lunch alone most days. Turkey sandwich, apple slices, a thermos of green tea. I'm not exciting. I'm not dramatic. I have never once in my life wanted to be the center of attention. But 6 months ago, my older sister told every person in our family, our parents, our cousins, our aunts, our grandmother, that I had seduced and stolen her husband. She told them I'd been sleeping with him behind her back for over a year. She told them I was the reason her marriage was falling apart. She cried on the phone. She cried at Sunday dinner. She posted a long, vague message on social media about the people closest to you being the ones who betray you the worst. And every single person believed her. Every single one. My mother stopped returning my calls. My father texted me 3 words. You disgust me. My cousin Felicia, who I'd been close with since we were 5, blocked me on everything. I became a ghost in my own family overnight. Not because of anything I did, but because my sister Lydia has always been the most believed person in any room she walks into. What nobody knew, what nobody even thought to ask, was that there were 4 security cameras inside Lydia's house. She'd had them installed herself after a break-in scare 2 years earlier. And those cameras didn't just record what she said happened. They recorded what actually happened. Every room, every angle, every word. And when the footage finally played, not in a living room, not over a phone call, but in an actual courtroom, during an actual custody hearing. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life. Before I go on, if this story hits close to home for you, go ahead and like and subscribe. Drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I love knowing who's out there. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I need to tell you about Lydia, because if you don't understand Lydia, nothing else in this story will make sense. Lydia is 28. She's 4 years older than me. Growing up, she was the golden child, not because she earned it, but because she demanded it. She had this way of shaping how people saw things. She could walk into a room where she'd just broken a lamp and somehow make you feel like you were the one who owed her an apology. She wasn't loud about it. That's what made her dangerous. She was soft-spoken, teary-eyed. She always looked like the wounded one, even when she was holding the knife. I learned early on not to compete with her. If I got a good grade, she'd get quiet and withdrawn until my mom noticed and said something like, "Corinne, don't brag. It makes your sister feel bad." If I made a friend, Lydia would slowly pull that friend toward her. Not aggressively, just with attention and favors and little comments like, "Corinne doesn't really open up to people. She's kind of cold once you get to know her." By high school, I'd stopped trying to be seen. I figured if I stayed small, stayed useful, stayed quiet, I'd at least be safe. I was wrong. Lydia married a man named Derek Hollis when she was 25. Derek was calm, polite, an IT project manager. He wasn't flashy. He wore plain button-downs and drove a Subaru Outback. He remembered your birthday and asked how your day was going and actually listened to your answer. He was the kind of man who made you feel steady just being around him. I liked Derek. Not romantically. I want to be very clear about that. I liked him the way you like someone who finally makes your difficult sister seem at peace. When Lydia was with Derek, she was lighter, less controlling. I thought maybe he was good for her. Maybe this was the version of Lydia that would finally let the rest of us breathe. For about 2 years, things were fine. I saw them at holidays. I helped them paint their guest bedroom one weekend. Derek and I barely spoke outside of group settings. I had my own life, my own apartment, my own routine. Then one afternoon in October, a Tuesday, around 4:30, Lydia called me crying. She said Derek had been distant, cold, coming home late. She said she thought he was seeing someone. She asked me to come over and sit with her. So I did. Because that's what I always did. When Lydia called, I showed up. That was the deal I'd made with myself a long time ago. Don't fight her. Don't challenge her. Just be there when she needs you, and maybe she'll leave you alone the rest of the time. I didn't know it then. But walking through her front door that Tuesday afternoon was the beginning of the worst 6 months of my life, and the cameras were already recording. To understand what happened that Tuesday, and everything that came after, I need to take you back. Way back. Because the thing between me and Lydia didn't start with Derek. It didn't start with a lie or a phone call or a courtroom. It started in a house on Prescott Lane, in a suburb just south of Atlanta, in a family that looked perfectly normal from the outside. Our parents are Gary and Denise Albright. Dad worked as a regional sales manager for a plumbing supply company. Mom was a receptionist at a pediatric clinic until I was about 12. Then she stopped working and stayed home. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We had a brick ranch house with a chain-link fence and a trampoline in the backyard that nobody used after 2011. From the outside, we were fine. But inside that house, there was a system. And the system was simple. Lydia was the priority. Everything else, including me, came second. I don't think my parents did it on purpose. At least, not at first. Lydia was their firstborn. She was colicky as a baby, anxious as a toddler, emotionally volatile as a kid. She needed more. She cried more. She demanded more. And my parents, especially my mom, gave it to her. Not because they didn't love me, but because Lydia's emotions filled up every room so completely that there was just no space left for mine. I remember being 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table trying to show my mom a drawing I'd made at school. A picture of our house with all four of us standing out front. Mom glanced at it, said, "That's nice, Corinne," and then turned back to Lydia, who was upset because a girl at school hadn't saved her a seat at lunch. That moment doesn't sound like much, but I remember the exact feeling. It was like someone gently closed a door in my face. Not slammed, just closed. Quietly. And after a while, I stopped knocking. Lydia figured out early that emotion was currency in our house. If she cried, people moved. If she raised her voice, people adjusted. And if she whispered that someone had hurt her, even if it wasn't true, people believed her without question. She wasn't calculating about it the way an adult would be. She was a child. But children learn what works. And what worked for Lydia was being the victim. There's one memory I've never been able to shake. I was 10. Lydia was 14. We were both in the kitchen after school. I'd poured myself a glass of orange juice and accidentally knocked the carton off the counter. It hit the floor and splashed everywhere. Across the tile, up the cabinet, onto Lydia's backpack, which was sitting by the table. I immediately grabbed paper towels. I was cleaning it up as fast as I could. But Lydia started screaming. Not about the juice. About her backpack. She said her notebook was inside, and it was ruined, and she had a history project due the next day, and I'd destroyed it. Mom came running in. Lydia was crying. Real tears. Red face. The whole performance. Mom didn't ask what happened. She looked at the mess, looked at me on my knees wiping the floor, and said, "Corinne, what is wrong with you? Why can't you be more careful?" I tried to explain. It was an accident. The carton was too close to the edge. But Mom was already pulling Lydia into a hug and telling her they'd go to the store to get a new notebook. Nobody helped me clean up the juice. I finished alone. And I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I'd already learned that my tears didn't change anything in that house. That dynamic never shifted. Not once. When Lydia was in high school, she accused a girl of spreading rumors about her. My parents called the girl's parents and threatened to involve the school. It turned out later that Lydia had started the rumors herself, about someone else, and the other girl had just repeated them. But by then, the damage was done, and nobody circled back to correct it. Nobody ever corrected anything when it came to Lydia. When I got into college, a decent state school on a partial scholarship for academics, my parents were polite about it. "That's great, Corinne." But when Lydia got a promotion at her first real job, they threw a dinner, invited the whole family, toasted her like she'd cured something. I sat at the end of the table eating my mom's casserole and smiled the whole time. I wasn't angry. That's the part that's hard to explain. I wasn't bitter. I was just trained. I'd been trained to take up less space, to expect less, to make peace with being the background character in a family that only had one spotlight, and it was always pointed at Lydia. When she started dating Derek, I was 20. I'd just started hygienist school. I met him at a barbecue my parents threw for the 4th of July. He shook my hand, asked what I was studying, and actually followed up with a question about it. I remember thinking, huh, he listens. That's all it was. A normal interaction. But in my family, even that was enough to make Lydia uneasy. Later that night, she pulled me aside in the hallway and said, "Don't be weird around Derek." I wasn't being weird. I was being spoken to. They got married 2 years later. I was a bridesmaid. I wore a dusty rose dress that didn't fit right and stood at the edge of every photo. At the reception, Lydia gave a toast about finding someone who sees her for who she really is. I clapped. I smiled. I meant it. I wanted her to be happy. Not because I was selfless, but because when Lydia was happy, the rest of us were safe. For about 2 years after the wedding, things were calm. Lydia and Derek bought a house. They got a dog, a beagle mix named Chester. Lydia redecorated every room and posted photos online. She looked settled. She looked content. I started to believe that maybe Derek had unlocked something in her that the rest of us never could. I built my own quiet life. I graduated, got the job at the dental practice, rented a 1-bedroom apartment on Claremont Road. I had a small circle, 2 close friends from school, a coworker named Priya who I ate lunch with sometimes. I went to yoga on Saturdays. I called my parents once a week and kept the conversations light. I wasn't thriving, but I was stable. And for someone who grew up learning to survive on emotional scraps, stable felt like enough. Then came that Tuesday in October. Lydia called at 4:16. I know because I checked my phone later. Her voice was shaky. She said Derek had been acting different for weeks, checking his phone in the bathroom, leaving for work early, coming home smelling like he'd showered somewhere else. She said, "I think he's cheating on me, Corinne. I think I'm losing him." And something in her voice, something raw and real, made me believe her. For once, I thought she wasn't performing. I thought she was genuinely afraid. So I drove to her house. I parked in the driveway next to her silver Lexus. I walked through the front door, past the camera mounted above the entryway, and I sat down beside my sister on her gray sectional sofa. I had no idea I was walking into a trap. That Tuesday evening at Lydia's house started the way most of our conversations did, with her talking and me listening. She was sitting on the left side of the sectional, legs curled underneath her, a box of tissues on the cushion beside her. Chester was asleep on the rug near the fireplace. The house smelled like vanilla, one of those plug-in air fresheners she always had in every room. She told me everything, or what she wanted me to believe was everything. She said Derek had become emotionally distant starting around August, that he'd stopped initiating conversations, that he'd sleep on the far edge of the bed and leave before she woke up. She said she'd found a charge on their credit card for a restaurant in Buckhead, a place they'd never been to together. When she asked him about it, he said it was a work lunch. But the charge was at 8:30 on a Friday night. I sat there and listened. I nodded. I asked careful questions. Have you talked to him directly about it? Has he been stressed at work? Do you want to see a counselor together? She shook her head at every suggestion. You don't understand, she said. He's already gone. I can feel it. Then she asked me something I didn't think much of at the time. Can you talk to him? I paused. What do you mean? You're calm. You don't get emotional. Maybe if you talk to him, just casually, you could figure out what's going on. He likes you. He'll open up to you. I should have said no. I should have told her that getting in the middle of someone else's marriage, even my sister's, wasn't something I was comfortable with. But I didn't say that. Because I'd spent my whole life saying yes to Lydia, because saying no to her always cost more than saying yes. So I agreed. And that single word, okay, became the thing she used to destroy me. Over the next 2 weeks, I talked to Derek 3 times. Once at a family dinner, where I casually asked how work was going. Once over the phone, when I called to ask about a recommendation for a laptop. Something Lydia had actually suggested I ask him about. And once at a coffee shop near his office, where we sat for about 40 minutes, and I carefully, awkwardly, tried to find out if something was wrong in his life without being obvious about it. That coffee shop meeting was on a Saturday morning, October 19th. I remember because I'd come from yoga, and I was still wearing leggings and a zip-up jacket. Derek was in jeans and a baseball cap. We sat at a small table near the window. I ordered a chai latte. He ordered black coffee. We talked about work, about stress, about how marriage can feel like pressure sometimes when both people stop communicating. He didn't admit to anything. He didn't mention another woman. He just said, quietly, I think Lydia and I are going through something. I'm trying to figure out what it is. That was it. That was the entire conversation. I drove home, called Lydia, and told her exactly what he said. She thanked me. She sounded calm. I thought I'd helped. I thought maybe things would settle down. 3 days later, my mother called me. Her voice was cold. Not angry. Cold. Like she was reading a script. Corinne, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Are you sleeping with Derek? I almost laughed. That's how absurd it sounded. But the silence on the other end made it clear. She wasn't joking. What? No, Mom, what are you talking about? Lydia told us everything. She said you've been meeting with Derek behind her back. She said she found messages. She said you've been seeing him for months. My hands started shaking. I pulled the car over. I was driving home from work and sat in a Walgreens parking lot with the engine running. Mom, that's not true. None of that is true. She asked me to talk to him. She told me to meet with him. I was trying to help her. There was a pause. Then my mother said, Lydia showed us a photo of you and Derek at a coffee shop. Just the two of you. She's devastated, Corinne. The photo. Someone had taken a photo of us at that table by the window, or maybe Lydia had followed me, or had someone else follow me. I don't know. But she had a picture, and the picture, without context, looked like exactly what she wanted it to look like. Mom, please listen to me. She asked me to do that. She literally asked me to talk to him and find out what was going on. I told her everything he said. That's not what she's saying. Then she's lying. Another pause. Longer this time. I think you should give her some space, Corinne. And honestly, I think you should give all of us some space. She hung up. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what had just happened. It felt like the ground under me had cracked open and I was falling, but slowly. Like a dream where you know you're going to hit the bottom, but you can't wake up. Then the messages started. My dad sent a text. "You disgust me." 3 words. No question mark. No request for my side. Just a verdict. My cousin Felicia sent a long paragraph about how she always knew something was off about me and how she couldn't believe I'd do this to my own blood. Then she blocked me. My Aunt Karen called and left a voicemail. She didn't yell. She just said, "I'm praying for you, Corinne. I hope you find your way back to God." Within 72 hours, I had been tried, convicted, and sentenced by my entire family. No one asked for my version. No one called Derek. No one questioned Lydia. Because Lydia had always been the believable one, the emotional one, the one whose tears moved people. And I had always been the quiet one, the closed-off one, the one people assumed was hiding something just because I didn't perform my feelings for an audience. I tried calling Lydia. She didn't answer. I texted her. 11 messages over 2 days. I asked her why she was doing this. I told her I had done exactly what she asked. I begged her to tell the truth. She replied once. One single message. "Don't contact me again. You know what you did." I stared at that message until the screen went dark. And then I cried. Not softly, not quietly. I sat on my bathroom floor at 11 o'clock at night and sobbed until my ribs ached. Chester, a dog I used to bring treats for, was probably asleep on her rug. Derek was probably confused in his own house. And I was on cold tile, completely alone, wondering how I'd lost everything by trying to help. The worst part wasn't the accusation. It wasn't even the family cutting me off. The worst part was realizing that I had walked into it willingly, that Lydia had set the trap, and I had smiled and stepped right in. Because I trusted her. Because even after everything, after all the years of being overlooked and dismissed and nudged aside, I still believed that my sister wouldn't do something like this to me. That was the night I realized something I'd been avoiding my whole life. Lydia didn't just want the spotlight. She wanted to make sure no one else could ever stand near it, and I had made it so easy for her. The first week after my family cut me off, I didn't function. I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean, I stopped doing the basic things that keep a person moving through the day. I called in sick to work 3 days in a row. I ate maybe twice. I left my phone face down on the kitchen counter because every time the screen lit up, my chest locked tight, hoping it was someone, anyone, saying they believed me. Nobody did. I replayed everything obsessively. The coffee shop, the phone calls, the conversations on Lydia's couch. I kept going over every word I said to Derek, trying to figure out if I'd done something wrong, if I'd been too friendly, too familiar, if maybe somehow I had crossed a line without knowing it. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. And that's what made it worse. Because there was nothing to fix. You can apologize for a mistake. You can't defend yourself against a lie that people have already chosen to believe. By the second week, I forced myself back to work. Dr. Kaplan, the dentist I worked for, noticed something was off. He didn't push. He just said, "If you need a day, take it. No questions." I appreciated that more than he probably knew. Priya noticed too. She sat across from me in the break room one afternoon while I stared at a sandwich I hadn't touched and said, "Corinne, talk to me." So I told her. Not everything. Not the childhood stuff. Not the years of being invisible. But the recent part. Lydia's phone call. The meeting with Derek. The accusation. The fallout. I told her in a flat, steady voice, like I was reading a case summary out loud, because if I let any emotion into it, I knew I'd break apart right there in the break room at 12:15 on a Wednesday. Priya listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said one thing. "Have you tried reaching out to Derek directly?" I hadn't. I'd been so focused on Lydia and my parents that I hadn't even considered going to the one other person who actually knew the truth. That night, I sent Derek a message. Simple, direct. "Derek, I don't know what Lydia told you about what's happening with my family, but she asked me to talk to you. I was trying to help. I need you to know that I never did anything inappropriate and I would never do that. If you're willing to tell the truth, please say something." He read it. I saw the little indicator change, but he didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next day. Not the next week. I sent one more message 5 days later. "Please, I'm losing my entire family over something that didn't happen." Nothing. That silence hurt almost more than my mother's phone call. Because Derek knew the truth. He sat across from me in that coffee shop and talked about his marriage like I was a friend, because that's all I was. And now he was choosing to stay quiet while I burned. I found out later, much later, that Lydia had told Derek a different story than what she told my parents. She told him that I had developed feelings for him and had been texting him behind her back. She showed him screenshots of messages, real messages I'd sent, but edited, cut and rearranged to remove her name, to remove the parts where I referenced her asking me to check in on him. What was left looked like a woman pursuing a married man. Derek didn't know what to believe, so he believed his wife, because that's what most people do. I tried one more time with my parents. I drove to their house on a Sunday morning, early, around 8, because I knew my dad would be sitting on the porch with his coffee before church. I pulled into the driveway. He saw me. He stood up, walked inside, and locked the screen door. He didn't say a word. I sat in my car in their driveway for 10 minutes, staring at the front of the house where I grew up. The brick was starting to fade near the bottom. The gutters needed cleaning. The trampoline in the back was still there. I could see the edge of it past the fence. I thought about the girl who used to live in that house, the one who drew pictures at the kitchen table and learned not to ask for too much. I drove away, and I didn't go back. That was the lowest point. Not a dramatic breakdown, not a scream or a confrontation. Just a quiet Sunday morning where my father chose a locked door over a conversation with his daughter. That's the kind of rejection that doesn't make noise. It just sits inside you like a stone and stays there. For the next few weeks, I moved through life like I was underwater. I went to work. I came home. I cleaned my apartment. I watched cooking shows I didn't care about because the sound of someone else's voice made the silence more bearable. I stopped going to yoga. I stopped calling anyone. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter, no snacks, because sitting at the table alone felt too deliberate, like I was choosing to be lonely. If you've ever had a time in your life where the people who were supposed to protect you became the ones you needed protection from, you know this feeling. It's not anger. It's not sadness exactly. It's this hollow, heavy thing that sits in your chest and makes everything feel slightly unreal. But something shifted around the end of November. It didn't happen all at once. There was no movie moment, no sudden revelation. It started small, with a notebook. I was cleaning out a drawer in my kitchen and I found an old spiral notebook from Hampton School. Inside were my class notes, study schedules, practice exam scores, page after page of my own handwriting. Organized, disciplined, steady. I flipped through it slowly and I realized something that caught me off guard. I had built a life, a rule, a degree, a license, a career, an apartment, a daily routine. I had done all of that without anyone in my family cheering me on. Without a single toast at a dinner table, without my mother's praise or my father's pride, I had done it anyway. And if I could do that, build something real out of silence and indifference, then I could survive this too. I didn't suddenly feel strong. I didn't jump up and start a recovery plan, but something unlocked. A small, stubborn piece of me that had been dormant for years. The piece that used to sit on the kitchen floor cleaning up orange juice alone and never once asked for help. Not because I didn't need it, but because I already knew I could do it by myself. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table. Actually sat down, with a plate, with a full meal. And I ate slowly. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat with myself. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like mine. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't have a plan. But I made one quiet decision that night, sitting at that table with a plate of pasta and a glass of water. I was done begging people to believe me. If the truth was going to come out, it wouldn't be because I cried loud enough for someone to listen. It would be because I stood still long enough for the lie to fall apart on its own. And Lydia's lies, I was starting to understand, had an expiration date she didn't even know about. December came in cold and gray. Atlanta doesn't get harsh winters, but that year there was a stretch of days where the temperature dropped into the low 30s and the sky stayed flat and white from morning to night. I remember the weather because it matched everything I was feeling. Still, muted, waiting. I started rebuilding quietly, not with some grand plan, just with small decisions, one after another, like placing bricks in a row without knowing yet what I was building. The first thing I did was go back to yoga. Saturday morning, 7:15 class, same studio on North Druid Hills I used to go to before everything fell apart. I unrolled my mat in the back corner. The instructor, a woman named Gail who had to be in her 60s, looked at me and smiled like I'd never left. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just said, "Welcome back, sweetheart." That small kindness almost broke me, but I held it together. I moved through the poses. I breathed. And when the class ended, I sat in my car in the parking lot and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a sliver of calm that wasn't forced. At work, I started volunteering for extra shifts, not because I needed the money, though it helped, but because I needed structure. Dr. Kaplan noticed, and one afternoon in mid-December, he called me into his office. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he told me that the practice was expanding. They were adding a second hygienist chair and bringing in a new dentist. And he wanted me to help train the incoming staff. "You're steady, Corinne," he said. "Patients trust you. That matters more than speed or technique." Steady. That word again. It had followed me my whole life. When I was younger, I thought it was a consolation prize. Something people said when they couldn't call you impressive. But sitting in Dr. Kaplan's office that afternoon, I started to see it differently. Steady wasn't a limitation. It was a foundation. And foundations don't crack when everything above them shakes. I said yes to the training role. It came with a small raise and more responsibility, and it gave me something I badly needed. A reason to show up every day that had nothing to do with my family. Around the same time, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Lena Osei. She had an office in a converted Victorian house near Emory, with creaky wooden floors and a window that overlooked a garden. She was calm, direct, and had a habit of pausing for a long time after I said something, like she was weighing every word before responding. In our first session, I told her the whole story, from childhood up through the accusation. She listened without reacting. When I finished, she said something I didn't expect. "You've spent your entire life managing someone else's emotions. What do you do with your own?" I didn't have an answer. Over the next 2 months, we met every Thursday at 5. She helped me see patterns I'd been living inside of without recognizing them. The way I minimized my own pain. The way I treated my silence as a strength when sometimes it was just survival. The way I'd been trained, not by cruelty, but by neglect, to believe that my experience didn't matter unless someone else validated it. She never told me to be angry at Lydia. She never told me to forgive her either. She just kept asking me the same question in different ways. What do you actually feel, Corinne? Not what you think you should feel. What do you feel? It took a long time before I could answer that, honestly. January passed, then February. I kept going to work, kept going to therapy, kept going to yoga. I started cooking real meals again. Not elaborate things, just soups and stir-fries and pasta that I made on Sunday nights and portioned out for the week. I bought a small plant for my kitchen windowsill, a pothos, the kind that's almost impossible to kill. I named it Ruthie, after my grandmother on my mother's side, the one person in my family who had always been kind to me without condition. Grandma Ruthie was 86. She lived in a retirement community near Savannah. She was sharp, funny, and had no patience for nonsense. I hadn't called her since the fire because I assumed Lydia had gotten to her too. But one evening in late February, my phone rang, and it was her. Corinne Marie Albright, she said. I haven't heard from you in 4 months, and I want to know why. I swallowed hard. Grandma, I figured you heard what happened. I heard a lot of noise. I'd like to hear your side. She was the first person in my family to say it. I told her everything. She was quiet for most of it. At the end, she said, I've known Lydia since the day she was born. That girl could cry on command before she could spell her own name. She didn't say she believed me outright, but she didn't hang up. She didn't lecture me. She said, you keep your head on straight, Corinne. The truth is a patient thing. It doesn't hurry, but it doesn't forget either. I wrote that line down after we hung up. I stuck it on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. The truth is a patient thing. By March, I was in better shape. Not healed, not whole, but functional in a way that felt earned rather than automatic. I had a therapist, a routine, a raise, and one family member who hadn't slammed the door. I still didn't know how the truth would come out, or if it ever would. But I had stopped hinging my survival on it. Then, something happened that I didn't see coming. Derek filed for divorce. I found out through Grandma Ruthie, who heard it from my Aunt Karen, who heard it from my mother. The story in the family was that Derek had abandoned Lydia, that he'd been unfaithful, that he'd betrayed her, that the marriage was destroyed because of what he and I had supposedly done. But the real reason, as I would later learn, was simple and ugly. Derek had finally discovered the edited screenshots. He'd gone through Lydia's phone after an argument and found the original messages, the ones she'd cropped and rearranged before showing them to him and my parents. He saw the full conversations, the ones where Lydia asked me to meet with him, the ones where I reported back to her afterward, the ones that proved, without question, that every interaction I'd had with him was at Lydia's request. He didn't confront her about it right away. He called a lawyer first, and his lawyer, a sharp woman named Janet Fry, told him something that changed everything. You said your wife has security cameras inside the house? Derek said yes. 4 cameras. Living room, kitchen, hallway, garage entry. Lydia had installed them in 2022 after someone tried to break into their car overnight. Janet Fry said, we need that footage. Because the footage wouldn't just show that I visited the house that Tuesday. It would show what Lydia said to me, what she asked me to do. It would show the full, unedited truth, in her own voice, on her own cameras, in her own home. Derek saved the footage before Lydia could delete it, and when the custody hearing was scheduled, because Lydia had immediately filed for full custody of their 18-month-old son, Caleb, the footage was submitted as evidence. I didn't know any of this yet. Not the footage, not the filing, not the legal strategy. I was still going to work, still eating my Sunday meal prep, still watering Ruthie the pothos on my kitchen windowsill. But the collision was coming, and it was closer than I ever could have imagined. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in early April. I had just finished with a patient, a 16-year-old girl who was nervous about her braces adjustment, and I was peeling off my gloves at the sink when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something, instinct, maybe, or just the fact that I'd been living on edge for months, made me pick up. Is this Corinne Albright? Yes. My name is Janet Fry. I'm an attorney representing Derek Hollis in his divorce and custody proceedings against Lydia Hollis. I'd like to talk to you about providing a witness statement. I leaned against the counter. My hands were still damp from washing. The fluorescent light above me buzzed faintly, the way it always did in the afternoons. A witness statement for what? For the truth, Ms. Albright. Janet explained, in calm and precise terms, what had happened. Derek had found the original messages. He'd preserved the security footage. Lydia had filed for full custody of Caleb, claiming Derek was emotionally abusive and unfaithful. And she'd used my name as part of that narrative. She had told her lawyer, the court, and a guardian ad litem that Derek and I had been involved in an affair, and that this affair had destabilized the marriage and made the home environment unsafe for their son. She was using me, again, as a weapon. Only this time, she was doing it under oath. Janet told me the custody hearing was scheduled for April 29th. She said the footage from the house cameras had been submitted into evidence, and it clearly showed Lydia asking me to talk to Derek, coaching me on what to say, and expressing no distress at all during the conversation she later described as devastating betrayals. The footage speaks for itself, Janet said. But your testimony would complete the picture. You were the one in the room. You were the one she manipulated. If you're willing to testify, it could make a significant difference, not just for Derek's case, but for setting the record straight. I didn't answer right away. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall of the hygiene room where a poster of a cartoon tooth reminded patients to floss daily. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my wrists. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. But Corinne, I want you to know something. You're not obligated to do this. But if you don't, Lydia's version becomes the only version on the legal record. And right now, that version says you're the other woman. I told her I'd call back by Monday. Then I hung up, sat down in the break room, and stared at the wall for 10 minutes without moving. I called Dr. Osi that evening, emergency session. She saw me the next morning at 8, before her regular schedule. I told her everything Janet had said. I told her I was scared. Not of Lydia, though I was, but of the system. Of standing in a courtroom and being looked at. Of being cross-examined. Of having my name spoken out loud in a legal proceeding connected to the word affair. Dr. Osei listened. Then she said, "What are you afraid will happen if you testify?" "That nobody will believe me, again." "And what happens if you don't testify?" "Then nobody ever has to." She let the silence sit. Then she said, "You've spent your whole life choosing invisibility because it felt safer. But Corinne, this time, being invisible is what's keeping the lie alive." I called Janet Fry on Saturday. I told her I'd testify. The hearing was held at the DeKalb County Courthouse on April 29th at 9 in the morning. I wore a navy blue blouse, black pants, and flat shoes. I arrived early. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and old paper. There were people sitting on wooden benches scrolling through their phones, waiting for their own cases. Nobody looked at me. I was just another person in a courthouse on a Tuesday morning. Derek was already inside the courtroom with Janet. He looked thinner than I remembered. Tired. He glanced at me when I walked in and gave a small nod. Not warm, not cold. Just an acknowledgement. We hadn't spoken in months. There was nothing to say yet. Lydia arrived 12 minutes late. She walked in with her attorney, a tall man in a gray suit, and she was wearing a soft cream-colored blouse with her hair pulled back. She looked composed, gentle even. She had that look she always had when she wanted people to protect her. Slightly fragile, slightly wounded, like the world had been unfair and she was just trying to survive it. She saw me and stopped. Just for a second. Her eyes locked onto mine. I watched something flash across her face. Not guilt, not fear. Irritation. Like I was an inconvenience she hadn't planned for. Then she sat down and didn't look at me again. The hearing began with procedural matters, custody terms, financial disclosures, parenting plan proposals. Then Janet Fry stood and requested permission to present video evidence. Lydia's attorney objected, arguing the footage was obtained without proper consent. The judge reviewed the submission, noted that Lydia herself had installed the cameras and that Georgia's recording laws permitted it in her own home, and allowed the footage. They played it on a screen mounted to the wall of the courtroom. The first clip was from October 15th, the Tuesday I came over. The camera was mounted in the upper corner of the living room. Wide angle, clear audio. You could see the sectional, the coffee table, the rug where Chester was lying. You could see Lydia, sitting with her legs tucked under her, talking rapidly. And you could hear every word. Just meet him somewhere casual, a coffee shop. Don't make it obvious. Ask him how he's doing, if he's stressed, if he's happy. Get him to open up. I need to know what's going on. In his head, Corinne. Then my voice. Are you sure? I don't want to overstep. And Lydia again. You're not overstepping. I'm asking you to do this. You're my sister. I trust you. The courtroom was quiet. I looked at the judge. She was watching the screen without expression, her pen still. They played 3 more clips. One from later that same evening, where Lydia and I discussed what questions I should ask. One from 2 days later, where I returned and told her what Derek had said, and she thanked me and hugged me. And one, the one that changed everything, from the following week, where Lydia was alone in the kitchen, on the phone with someone I couldn't identify, and she said this. I've got the photo from the coffee shop. I'm going to send it to Mom first. She'll lose it. Then Dad. Then I'll post something online. By the time Corinne figures out what happened, nobody will be on her side. That was the moment. Not a scream. Not a gasping revelation. Just a woman's voice. Calm and calculated, describing exactly how she planned to dismantle her sister's life. On camera. In her own home. In her own words. I didn't move. I didn't react. I sat on that wooden bench and felt the room tilt slightly, the way it does when something you always suspected is finally confirmed out loud. Lydia's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it, and Lydia, for the first time in her life, had absolutely nothing to say. The judge let the footage run its full length. Every clip, every angle, every word Lydia had spoken in what she thought was the privacy of her own scheme. When the screen finally went dark, the courtroom stayed silent for what felt like a full minute, though it was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. But silence in a courtroom has a different weight than silence anywhere else. It presses down on you. Lydia's attorney asked to approach the bench. The judge allowed it. They had a brief, low conversation I couldn't hear from where I was, sitting. Then the judge straightened in her chair and addressed the room. We'll proceed with witness testimony. Janet Fry called me to the stand. I walked up slowly. My shoes were quiet on the courtroom floor. I sat down, adjusted the microphone, and placed my hands flat on my thighs to keep them from shaking. I could feel Lydia's eyes on me from across the room, but I didn't look at her. Not yet. Janet started with the basics. My name, my relationship to Lydia and Derek, how often I saw them. Then she moved into October. Ms. Albright, can you describe the nature of your meeting with Derek Hollis on October 19th at the coffee shop? I spoke clearly, slowly. I told the court that Lydia had asked me to meet Derek, that she wanted me to find out if something was wrong in their marriage, that I agreed because she was my sister and I wanted to help. I described the conversation: laptops, work stress, marriage tension, nothing romantic, nothing hidden. And after the meeting, did you report back to your sister? Yes. I called her the same afternoon and told her exactly what Derek said. And what was her response? She thanked me. She said it was helpful. Janet paused. Then she said, "At any point, did you have any romantic or physical contact with Derek Hollis?" No. Never. At any point, did Derek express romantic interest in you? No. Were you aware that your sister later used a photograph from this meeting to accuse you of having an affair with her husband? I found out about a week later, when my mother called me. Janet nodded and returned to her table. Then Lydia's attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was tall, deliberate. He buttoned his jacket before he spoke, which struck me as the kind of gesture designed to make you feel small before a single word came out. Ms. Albright, isn't it true that you initiated contact with Mr. Hollis on multiple occasions? I contacted him because my sister asked me to. But you chose to meet him, alone, at a coffee shop, on a weekend. Doesn't that seem intimate? It was a public place in the middle of the morning. I was wearing yoga pants and a zip-up jacket. There was nothing intimate about it. A couple of people in the gallery shifted in their seats. I don't know if they were reacting to what I said or how I said it, but I kept my voice even. Dr. Osei had told me something in our last session that I kept turning over in my head. You don't have to perform your innocence. You just have to tell the truth, and let the truth be enough. Lydia's attorney tried two more angles. He asked if I'd ever had personal feelings for Derek. I said no. He asked if I'd ever sent Derek messages that could be described as affectionate. I said the only messages I sent were logistical, arranging the coffee meeting and checking in afterward, and that Lydia had been aware of all of them because she'd asked me to send them. Then he made a mistake. He said, "Isn't it possible that your sister simply misinterpreted the nature of your contact with her husband?" I looked at him. Then I looked at the dark screen where the footage had played. "Your client didn't misinterpret anything," I said. "She planned it. She said so herself. On camera." He didn't ask another question after that. He returned to his seat, and I saw him lean toward Lydia and whisper something. She didn't react. She was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully arranged in that expression I'd seen 1,000 times, soft, dignified, controlled. But something was different now. The mask was the same, but the room wasn't buying it anymore. The judge called a short recess. 15 minutes. I stepped out into the hallway and sat on one of those wooden benches. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the release of something I'd been carrying for 6 months. I pressed my palms together between my knees and breathed. When the hearing resumed, Janet submitted the unedited text messages, the ones Derek had recovered from Lydia's phone, the full threads. My messages to Lydia, with her responses. The ones where she told me what to ask. The ones where she suggested the coffee meeting. The ones where she said, "You're doing me a huge favor, Corinne." Every message Lydia had cropped and manipulated was now displayed in its original form. The judge reviewed them for several minutes. Then she asked Lydia's attorney if his client wished to take the stand. There was a pause. A long one. He leaned in again, spoke to Lydia quietly. She shook her head once, then again. He straightened up and said, "My client declines to testify at this time." The judge made a note. Then she addressed both parties. She said that the evidence presented raised serious concerns about the credibility of the petitioner's claims. She said the footage and message records indicated a pattern of deliberate misrepresentation. She said she would be ordering a full psychological evaluation as part of the custody review, and that temporary custody of Caleb would be granted to Derek pending further proceedings. Lydia's mouth opened slightly, just barely, like the air had been pulled from her lungs without warning. It was the first time I'd ever seen her caught without a response. No tears, no performance. Just a woman sitting in a courtroom realizing that the tools she had used her entire life, manipulation, selective truth, emotional control, had finally stopped working. The judge dismissed the session. People started standing, gathering papers, murmuring. I stayed on the bench for a moment. Then I stood, picked up my bag, and walked toward the door. Lydia was standing in the aisle. We were about 4 feet apart. She looked at me, and for just a second, the mask slipped. Not into sadness, not into guilt, into something colder, something that said, "You were never supposed to win this." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I walked past her, through the courtroom doors, down the hallway, and out into the April sun. It was warm, bright. The parking lot smelled like asphalt and fresh-cut grass from the median strip. I sat in my car. I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I let out a breath I think I'd been holding since I was 7 years old, standing at a kitchen table, holding up a drawing nobody wanted to look at. Tell me what you would have done if you'd been sitting on that bench, watching your own sister's words play back on a screen, the words she never thought anyone would hear. Would you have spoken? Would you have stayed silent? I think about that sometimes. What other people would have chosen. Because in that moment, I wasn't brave. I wasn't triumphant. I was just tired. And relieved. And still a little bit broken. But the truth was out. And it hadn't come from shouting or begging or proving myself over and over again. It came from a camera that Lydia installed herself. And that, more than anything, is the part she'll never forgive. The weeks after the hearing were strange, not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, like stepping out of a building you've been inside for so long that the sunlight feels almost aggressive. The court's ruling spread through my family the way Lydia's original lie had, quickly, unevenly, and with a lot of people suddenly unsure of what to say. My Aunt Karen called my mother. My mother called my cousin Felicia. Felicia unblocked me on social media but didn't send a message. I watched the little notification pop up on my phone and felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Just a dull awareness that the same people who had convicted me without a question were now circling back without an apology. My mother was the first to reach out directly. She called on a Tuesday evening in mid-May, almost exactly 7 months after the day she told me to give the family some space. Her voice was different, softer, careful, like she was speaking to someone she wasn't sure would listen. "Corinne, I don't know what to say." I let the silence sit for a moment, not to punish her, but because I genuinely didn't know what I wanted from this conversation. "You don't have to say anything right now, Mom. I should have asked you. I should have listened. Lydia was so upset, and you believed her. I know. You always have." She started crying, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to make her feel better. I didn't say, "It's okay." I didn't fill the space with reassurance. I just listened to her cry the way she had never listened to me. After a while, she said, "Can I see you?" I told her I needed time. And I meant it. That's the part people don't understand about situations like this. The idea that once the truth comes out, everything snaps back to normal. It doesn't. The truth doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the months of silence, the ignored calls, the father who texted, "You disgust me," without asking a single question. The truth just clears the air. What you build in that air afterward, that's a separate decision, and it's yours to make on your own timeline. My father didn't call. He didn't text. My mother told me he felt ashamed, which I believed, because shame was the only emotion my father ever processed honestly. But shame without action is just discomfort. And I wasn't going to manage his discomfort for him. Not anymore. Felicia eventually sent a message. It was long. It was earnest. She said she felt horrible and that she should have known better. I read it twice and replied with something short. "Thank you for saying that. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I will be eventually." She respected that. I appreciated it. Grandma Ruthie called the day after the hearing. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't gloat. She just said, "You stood up straight, Corinne. That's all that matters." I cried after that call. Not from sadness, from something closer to relief. The kind that hits you only after you realize you've been bracing for impact for months and the crash finally came, and you're still standing. As for Lydia, her world didn't collapse the way you might expect. She didn't lose everything overnight, but the cracks were spreading. The court-ordered psychological evaluation came back in June. I wasn't given the full details, but Derek told me later. We'd started speaking again. Carefully, respectfully, as two people connected by a strange and painful chapter. That the evaluator had flagged what they described as persistent patterns of manipulation, distortion of events, and difficulty accepting accountability. The evaluator recommended ongoing therapy and a structured co-parenting plan with Derek as the primary custodial parent. Lydia fought it. Of course she did. She hired a new attorney. She filed motions. She tried to have the footage thrown out on a technicality. Each attempt failed. Not dramatically, just procedurally, one ruling at a time, like a door being closed and locked from the other side. She never contacted me. Not once. No apology. No explanation. No message. Part of me expected something. A voicemail at 2 in the morning. A letter slipped under my door. Even an angry text. But there was nothing. And that nothing told me everything. Lydia wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry it didn't work. I thought about reaching out to her. More than once. In therapy, Dr. Osei and I talked about it at length. Not about forgiveness. We agreed that forgiveness isn't something you owe anyone, especially someone who hasn't asked for it, but about closure. About what I needed to feel like this chapter had an ending. What I realized eventually was that I didn't need Lydia to give me closure. She couldn't. Because the wound wasn't just about what she did in October. It was about 24 years of being the invisible one, the secondary daughter, the one whose pain didn't register because it wasn't loud enough to compete with Lydia's performance. Closure didn't come from Lydia. It came from me. From sitting in Dr. Osei's office every Thursday and slowly untangling the stories I'd told myself, that I wasn't worth listening to, that my feelings were a burden, that staying small was the safest way to survive. Those stories had kept me alive in that house on Prescott Lane, but they were suffocating me now. And one by one, I let them go. If you've ever been the quiet one in a family that only rewarded noise, type, "I see you," in the comments. Because I spent most of my life thinking that being steady meant being overlooked. And I want you to know, It doesn't. It means you were strong enough to hold yourself together when no one else was paying attention. And that's not a weakness. That's the whole foundation. By late summer, my life looked different. Not unrecognizable. I still worked at the same practice, still lived in the same apartment, still went to yoga on Saturdays. But the texture had changed. I spoke up more at work. I started having dinner with Priya outside of the office. Real dinners, at restaurants, where we talked about things that had nothing to do with teeth. I called Grandma Ruthie every Sunday. I repotted Ruthie the pothos into a bigger planter because she'd outgrown the first one. That felt like something, even if I couldn't explain why. I set boundaries with my parents. Not walls, but boundaries. I agreed to see my mother once a month. We met for lunch at a diner near her house. The first few times were awkward. She overcompensated. Too much smiling, too many compliments, too eager to fill the silence. But over time, she settled. And so did I. We weren't healed, but we were trying. And trying, when it's honest, is enough to start with. My father and I still haven't spoken. I'm not closing that door permanently, but I'm not going to knock on it either. He knows where I am. He's always known. Derek and I don't have a friendship exactly, but we have a mutual respect. He sends me photos of Caleb sometimes, a toddler with big brown eyes who has no idea how much chaos surrounded his first 2 years of life. I hope he never finds out. I hope he grows up in a home where the truth isn't something people are afraid of. There's one more thing I want to tell you. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out my closet, and I found the bridesmaid dress from Lydia's wedding. Dusty rose. Still didn't fit right. I held it up and looked at it for a long time. I remembered standing at the edge of the photos. I remembered clapping during the toast. I remembered believing that if Lydia was happy, the rest of us would be safe. I folded the dress neatly, put it in a donation bag, and set it by the front door. Then I went to the kitchen. I watered Ruthie. I made a cup of green tea. I sat at my table, the same table where I'd made the decision to stop begging. And I looked out the window at the afternoon light coming through the blinds. The truth is a patient thing. It doesn't hurry, but it doesn't forget either. And neither do I. If this story stayed with you, if any part of it felt familiar or made you think of someone you know, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And remember, you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to be the one worth listening to. Sometimes, the quietest person in the family is the one carrying the most truth. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.